Broadcasting from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello and welcome to the midweek edition of WilmsFront. The date is Wednesday the 19th of August 2020. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive channels and on the Entropy software interface for those of you in the live chats to interact with tonight's show. I put the link in both the YouTube and DLive live chats. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are nearing the halfway point of our stage 4 coronavirus lockdown, with the state of emergency and disaster lasting until September 13th. Case numbers have been slowly declining, which is fantastic. That means less sick and dead Victorians going forward. It also will force the Andrews government to relax coronavirus restrictions sooner rather than later, so we can have our lives back and people can get back to work and rebuild their livelihoods, though Andrews has added a new condition to relaxing restrictions, and that testing numbers must remain around 20,000 a day so we can have confidence the virus is not widespread in the community. But Dan Andrews has already extended the state of emergency to its 6 months maximum, so he would have to pass new legislation if he wanted to keep it going, so he'd have to finally front up to the state parliament. Outbreaks, sadly, are still occurring in aged care, healthcare, and disability care facilities, which is the major contributor to the daily death counts. Breaking late last night was the news that the Morrison government had broken a deal to access the Oxford University coronavirus vaccine that is in stage 3 clinical trials, and it would be made available for free to every Australian. Scott Morrison originally said that he would make it as mandatory as possible, but he's backed down from that later today and said Australians would be strongly encouraged to take the jab. While we here in Melbourne are battling the coronavirus and coping with the lockdown, the ongoing culture and street war against the West is continuing. In the United States, Black Lives Matter 2.0, in alliance with Antifa, is continuing to cause destruction, unrest and violence in major US cities in the lead up to the November elections. Race and racial grievances has turned into not just the biggest election issue in the US, but the greatest cultural crisis the nation has ever faced. Anti-white racism is fast becoming the greatest global bigotry of the 21st century. You only have to see the racially motivated violence and genocide that is taking place in South Africa as we speak to see where all of this anti-white hate is heading. My guest on WilmsFront tonight is Jason Kohne, better known as No White Guilt, the name of his White Wellbeing and White Positive project, which aims to bring purpose, safety and happiness to Westernkind. He hosts regular live stream on his channel entitled Going Free, which is also the name of his book, A Guide to Aligning with the Archetype of Westernkind. His other books are Born Guilty, which is a personal memoir of his life overcoming anti-white bigotry, and also Proximus Rising, Take Back Your Destiny. He's a regular contributor to Mark Collett's Patriotic Weekly Review live streams and spoke at their 2020 Patriotic Alternative Conference. Jason, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. It's great to be here and great to be with your magnificent audience over there in the land of Oz. All things wonderful. I love our brothers and sisters over there, and I'm very excited to be here with you to be able to talk about everything that's happening because we are a global movement. This is no longer the antiquated nationalism of the past where anti-whites can just sweep in and pretend to be our leaders and then say, hey, you know what? You people over there in America, you white people, you can have it better if we just disadvantage the white people in Australia somehow and then fall for that sort of nonsense again. Never again. Now we're standing together, united, a big white ring that goes all the way around planet Earth, white roses blooming on every continent. And so exciting. A big hello to your audience that's here live and everybody that'll be watching and replay. And I can see now as I look over at the screen that our great brother Raymond Foster, the amazing gentleman, is here. So is Althea is here, another great participant in service to white well-being. It's wonderful to see you people here with me early in the morning here outside of Mordor, Washington, D.C. At 5 a.m., of course, here, Eastern Standard Time, raining outside, but we are sunny in here with the conversation.
Yes, you've gotten up bright and early for this stream, which I greatly appreciate. You literally are on the other side of the world with the time difference, but as you said, through the power of the internet and freedom of the internet, I'm able to connect with you and your fellow men in the United States, and I've interviewed your UK compatriots Mark Collett and Laura Towler. So it's great that there's this community that's been able to. I know that big tech now does its best to suppress it, but I liken it to a game of whack-a-mole.
Yes.
There's always other platforms that we can migrate to, and if they try to silence or beat someone up into submission, there's always going to be someone else that's going to pop up.
Well, very well said. In fact, one of the things that we did very early on was I made a promise to the anti-whites that for every platform they censored me from, I would sign up to 2 more platforms, and then I would eventually get back on the one that they censored me from. And I kept that promise, and as a consequence, the number of platforms I was on proliferated and ballooned well up into the low 30s. And then it just got to the point where that was about as much as I could manage. But it also ended up being a deterrent to the anti-whites, because when they look across the field and they say, who would we like to take down? They always go for, as is the wont of all predators, the weakest in the pack. So when they see somebody who has maybe one platform, that'll be the person they go after, rather than the person who is on 30 plus. Nonetheless, though, I mean, we've suffered quite a lot of setbacks. Most people don't realize, because my colleague and I, Mr. Jared George, would be another great guy to have on your program. He's a brilliant mind. We do the after party together. We have suffered quite a lot of censorship that we just never tell the world about, kicked off of payment processors and social media platforms again and again and again, and we find ways back on. But it's as you say, it's whack-a-mole. It's an endless fight, because we're out in the real world struggling for white well-being.
It was you and Mark that got us here in Australia, myself, the website that I operate, the Unshackled, and our colleagues at XYZ, who we produced the Uncockables program with, onto Entropy, because Mark got completely demonetized from YouTube, and Entropy is a brilliant software as a workaround, because it's completely independent of Google, because once they demonetize you, they stiff you. They don't pay you what you're entitled to.
Yeah, well, they demonetized me, and I was prepared for that sort of thing to happen. In fact, I took the step of allowing. They offered to me, and I think this was an algorithmic thing, that once you reached a certain level of viewers, hours of content produced, and hours of content viewed, you just automatically are given an offer to have channel membership. So I went ahead and took it as a buffer against actions that they would take against me, censorship actions. If you have more layers than of the onion, then they got to peel more layers off, and they eventually did. They didn't let that last very long, but when they removed the membership, it was demonetizing the channel to be able to do so. So I was somewhat ready for that, and I had some verbiage, some legalese that I sent them, and they immediately paid up, which is rare. But this is the kind of thing that we have to prepare ourselves for when it comes to the anti-whites and the shenanigans and the chicanery that they are always up to. There's no end, because there is no end to the evil in their hearts.
Well, a lot of my time has been taken up running the Unshackled as basically deplatforming proof everything. So I, at the end, well, it was the beginning of this year, I lost my personal Facebook profile and page, and the rest of the Unshackled was massively shadow banned. XYZ, they recently lost their Facebook page for a satire article that it was in one of those categories where it was too believable.
All right.
So
Right.
it can come at you any time. But you, Mark and Laura, I think that you've really proven that if you kicked off Facebook and YouTube, it's not the end, because you've really shown that BitChute is a viable alternative. Big names on Gab and also Telegram as well.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, we have to, and it's part of the process of growing as a community in service of white well-being, and that is that the participants, first of all, there are not members, there are no memberships there, and there can't be a passive audience here. What we talk about all the time in Going Free is that people are participants. That's why I refer to the people who watch, especially the people who watch Going Free, as the advanced class. This is the advanced placement students, because we're the ones who are not just documenting the doom, we're not just dissecting the doom, we're actually trying to do something to correct the doom. And I share at the beginning of these shows testimonies from people who are changing their lives, changing the lives of people who are in their lives. We have this spreading to communities of various types, communities that were and could be quite hostile to each other, different religions and the like, and yet they're able to pick this up. And the point of all of this is, when it comes down to the individual who is imbibing the material, otherwise, or often known in other scenarios as an audience member, those scenarios for us are just not going to cut it. We need to be those who are creating content, those who are receiving the content, and then going out into the world as well and spreading it with the powers that they have in the circles and spheres of influence that they have. They need to be participants in that. They need to be aware that at any moment we can disappear off of a particular platform, a server, what have you, and they need to be ready then to go hunt us down again. So there's a duty that both of us have, those creating content and those receiving it. The duty of creating content is we have to repeatedly say, you can find us here, there, and over here, and this place. And then those receiving the content, they need to participate in that. They need to go and create accounts on these other platforms and then begin to follow us there as well. This, again, is an enormous deterrent for the anti-whites, because if you have a content creator that has webs that run all over the internet, and there's apropos to call it the webs, if you have a web that runs across the internet, then you are far more difficult to shut down and therefore less likely to become one of their targets.
I noticed that I think you said that one of your followers, Elfie Pro, is already pointing out my mispronunciations. That's a running gag on all of my live streams. I always stuff up the pronunciations, including of your name.
That's fine. That's fine. That's Kohne is the
Kohne.
That's fine.
The proper German pronunciation.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It was always the problem, of course, with a name like that, German name like that, is I was a star athlete, and I played sports my whole life, football, baseball, all the way up through university, and could have played minor league baseball, made the bad decision, professional baseball, made the bad decision to play college football instead. But what ends up happening is nobody could pronounce the last name. So I would go, there was one game, football game, where the team was really relying on me to get yards and get touchdowns, get points. And the announcer for this giant stadium, every single time the ball was given to me or passed to me, would say my name a different way. Every single time he had a different pronunciation for my last name. And so everybody was laughing in the stands. It was a big joke. And my father at halftime couldn't take it. He went up to the booth and he said, "Look, fellas, this is how you pronounce it." So the second half of the game, they got it right. But yeah, so no worries there whatsoever.
It's been a bit of a story of my life as well, because Wilms is also a German name, pronounced Wilms in German. And when you're dictating it to people over the phone or registering something at, say, a counter, they think it's Wills or Williams. But my parents always had this trick that it's Wilms as in films, but with a W.
Ah, that's nice. Yes. Yeah, that absolutely would work. And that's the kind of things that when we came, our people came to shores of countries that weren't the ones we started in, or weren't the ones that necessarily that those who were carrying forth our particular hue of Western civilization had started. We were able to very easily meld into those environments because those environments were created by the same biospirit that beat inside of our chests. We immediately, of course, would adopt. We came up with, as you say, these little tricks on how to pronounce the name if it was difficult for the locals. And so I think it's magnificent. And our recapturing of our destiny presupposes that we are going to enhance these hues of Western civilization, that we are going to, the Australians will be more Australian. The Germans will be more German. I know we want to talk about some of that today. And in America, of course, I would say the Americans would be more American, but we're such a big country that I'm a very proud Southerner. So instead, I'll just say the Southerners will be more Southern. The Midwesterners, they'll be more Midwestern. It'll be whatever it ends up being. But we like the heterogeneity in Western civilization. So everyone will be even better. The colors will be of our different hues will be even more vivid once we do recapture our destiny, which we absolutely will. And I want to thank you, brother, for the work that you're doing in service to white well-being. This is a very important project that you have and that you take the time out of your life to do for our people. So I thank you for your service to white well-being. And I also thank everyone who is in your audience, your moderators and your friends out there. Thank you all for your service to Western civilization, to white well-being. This is what we have to be doing. It gives our lives meaning, and there's nothing I would rather be doing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jason. It's sort of something that in my 20s I became drawn to, because I noticed that this creeping white anti-racism, which is now reaching dangerous levels, and when I say dangerous, violence and murder, because I'm Generation Y. I'm 30 years old. I grew up in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, around near Frankston. It was then and still is overwhelmingly a white majoritarian area, but obviously we had a minority of non-whites there. And when I was at school, there was this consensus, which I think was the correct one, that racism, racial discrimination was things of the past. We as a human race have moved beyond it. And the non-whites at our school and in our community, they assimilated because they were forced to, obviously, in a white majoritarian area, but we didn't treat them any differently. We got on with them because they adapted to our culture. It's when, and Australia has slowly upped the floodgates when it comes to mass immigration, but it was 2015 when I noticed this real, that's when basically the cultural Marxist, they really came out in the open and started promoting, no, that there's always been this racist, sexist, homophobic, hierarchical institution in our Western society. We need to tear it all down. And I saw it all started, what is the University of Missouri? That's when they all started these anti-racism protests. The irony that a university was full of racism is extremely laughable, and still is, but that was sort of my red pill then, because I'd been raised in this post-racist environment, and when I saw that, I was like, hang on, no, that's not true at all. This needs to be corrected. You should what you're saying is completely wrong and dangerous.
Precisely, absolutely irresponsible. And now we see that the kinds of things that these people in official positions, positions that in Western civilization, we give our respect even when the office holder doesn't deserve the respect. And that's part of order. That's part of what is natural for the biospirit of the West. It's one of the reasons why we make Western civilization, and no one else can make Western civilization, just like we can't make Black civilization or Asian civilization. And as a consequence, these people go into the office, they hold these offices, they say the things that they say, and then we have the the results in the streets. And in fact, we just had 2 days ago a violent, monstrous, bestial consequences on the streets of one American city, where they had these different, several different anti-white groups that had given speeches. They had a rally in one of these cities. They called for things, which I'll just say, as I say on my channel, to keep things safe. They may or may not be true. You have to look it up for yourself. Check with CNN, where they called for things like police to be killed and to be choked with their own umbilical cords when they were born. And then, right after this rally where they said these monstrous things and they called for these things to happen, white people were randomly attacked. Again, it's probably not true. Maybe it's just happening on World of Warcraft, but there are videos of and I didn't know this until yesterday, as a matter of fact, that the woman was actually not a woman. It was actually a man that dresses as a woman, or is converting to being a woman or something like this, that the white guy was trying to protect.
This is in Portland, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
And they beat him to within an inch of his life. So this is exactly what you're talking about. This is irresponsible speech that ends up with violent consequences. And you, my friend, if you and I said anything, not even remotely close to any admonition to violence or exhorting people to violence, if we just said that violence was okay, which we don't say, we would be jailed. I know they would come to my house in a minute and take me right to jail and say I was responsible for anybody who got hurt. And then there would be, not only would there be the legal, from the state's case, the prosecuting attorney, pardon me, but then there would also be private lawsuits, and that's what happens in the states very often. So yeah, there's obviously what appears to be a double standard in the application of the law, and it appears to be so because anti-whites are applying the law.
Portland, that gave birth to the modern Antifa movement, the Rose City Antifa, and that's how they spread their tentacles throughout the Western world, enabled by the city administration there. And we've seen since BLM 2.0, after George Floyd's death, that Portland it's even gotten more dangerous there, where it's become basically every night the Antifa out on the streets. It's basically a hunting ground for those who look too white, that they might be far right, fascist, or whatever. Which, as you just retold that story about that man who was just set upon because, well, he was a white trucker.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that if you are a white person, you need to be vehemently anti-white. And if they cannot detect that you are vehemently anti-white, then they view you as the enemy. They view you as what will soon be their victim. Another one of the consequences that we had here in the States as a result of all of this anti-white rhetoric, which is true across the country. We've had, at any given moment, 60 plus cities on fire, hundreds of cities where you have these malefactors, these anti-white, militarized hit squads that are destroying Western civilization, white erasing us from our own civilization. One of the things, one of the other consequences, most egregious, was the wanton murder of a 5-year-old Cannon Hennant, little white boy.
I've heard about that senseless execution style of a 5-year-old boy just playing in his yard. It's just, I couldn't believe that.
Well, and yeah, this is the typical response that we get from the media, the regime's media, anti-white media, is what they want to do is they want to quarantine such events. If they can, they won't say anything about it at all. The reason why is because it contradicts the anti-white narrative, where non-white people and other victim groups are always, so-called victim groups, are always long-suffering, set upon, innocent, never do anything wrong. And the white man, the white race, Westernkind, is the evil group that menaces the rest of the world. What they have to do, though, occasionally, is the story is big enough that they, on a local level, can't ignore it. They tick it up to maybe local newspaper, and if there is still too many people aware and wondering why it's not on the news, to maintain what little credibility they have left, they will just quarantine it, put it out on the local news. But of course, with the white man's technology, the World Wide Web, we are able to speak with each other peer to peer, talk about what's going on in the world. This happening in North Carolina, the whole rest of the world found out. And then when that happens, the anti-whites have to try to whitewash it on a national scale. And so they bring the story out and they try to make the story as brief as they can to talk about it. And they want to put it to bed by saying that, well, the murderer or prospective murderer, that individual has been arrested and charged, end of story, end of conversation. Well, of course, that's not the end of conversation. That's not how it's going to work anymore. That's not how it's going to work with us in service to white well-being. That's not how the anti-whites work. No, the way it works now is that every single anti-white on planet Earth is responsible for Canon Hennant's murder. Every single anti-white on planet Earth has to make it up to every single one of us for the rest of time. And we will forgive what happened to Canon Hennant as soon as the anti-whites forgive us for all of these make-believe things that they have charged us with that happened hundreds or thousands of years ago, or they say is happening now, but can't be seen, touched, smelled, or measured by any sort of scientific or investigation of any matter whatsoever. So yeah, this is the way that we have to bring the service to white well-being to a focal point in our struggle against our victimizers. We don't even say in Going Free that these people are enemies, because when you say enemy, you have this idea that there is some even measure of power that they can inflict harm on one another. No, we are in a predator victim situation, and we need to recognize it, and then we need to use our intelligence to find a way out of it and to recapture our destiny.
As far as I'm aware, there's no evidence yet that Cannon was killed. It was an anti-white hate crime. Sorry, I should say murdered. That it was an anti-white hate crime. But I see what you were doing there. That when there is a death of a person of color by a white person, then the whole white race is to blame, which. And obviously, you there is reversing the positions there. This universal guilt complex, which is, and this is why you titled your book "Born Guilty," and there's this huge paradox when those whites and members of Western civilization, they're told it's silly to be proud of their history. Well, you didn't do that. You are only proud of your history because of your own inadequacy. But then at the same time, they say, "Oh, but you still must feel guilty for the white people in the past who did bad things." So you must be responsible for the bad things, but you shouldn't. It's wrong for you to take have any sense of pride in the good things.
Well, and precisely, and that absolutely reveals the objective of the anti-white. They want you to make amends. They want you to pay. And what we say, we have something that is we refer to as the 9 words, and it is: atonement cannot be made for a grievance never committed. And this is something that I hit upon when I was actually in junior high school, that we are living in an anti-white narrative, and we are I said to my peers at the time, and this was 7th and 8th grade, so 11 to 13 years of age, I said, we are the bad guys in this school now because we're white. The white students before us, they were the bad guys in this story, and the white kids that come after us, they will be the bad guys in this story, because you cannot make amends for a grievance that you never committed. It's just about always being put into a position where there are pretexts for you to lower your defenses so that you can be victimized by the anti-whites. And that's for several motivations, reasons that they do that. But of course, they want us to take the blame and to have to make amends for these fabrications, which most of them are. These claims of these injustices are just fanciful fabrications. And we see these in what we call hush crimes. They happen all the time in our lives, every single day. And of course, we just have these hush historical crimes where these or hate hoaxes, which we see on a regular basis. We have these historical hate hoaxes, rather, that the anti-whites will force upon us. But you're absolutely right. At no point do they say, well, let us thank you for electricity. Let us thank you for modern medicine. Let us thank you for modern agriculture and clean running water and sewage removal. And let us thank you for the telephone and the computer. That's never going to happen. In fact, we're going to see the exact opposite. And we already see it in the United States, where every February, Black History Month, we see that inventions are every year, more inventions are taken away from the white people who invented the X, Y, or Z, and then given to some non-white person. And then occasionally it's quite laughable and they have to pull it back. Things like cell phone, when the person who first was associated with that was even still alive. So this is the sort of thing that we're faced with. And what is important, though, is that we don't just stop at the discussion where we discover, well, look at this gross injustice. Look at this gross double standard. What's important then is to say, how can we take that information to our brothers and sisters out there, make them aware of what's going on, and empower them in a way that they can then empower those who are around them. And we can then spread this, as we say in Going Free, as a curative contagion. And I just saw, brother, as I pass it back to you, that the wonderful, lovely Porridge has shown up in the live chat. Great to see you, dear brother. A true hero for Westernkind, ladies and gentlemen. And just another testament to the kind of good people you have in Australia.
Well, that's why there's now White History Month, which is just passed, because, well, there's Black History Month, but there's also, what is it, June over in the US is LGBT Pride Month as well. But whenever you make a recognition of a white accomplishment, then it must be some sort of white supremacist event where you're trying to beat down non-whites, which nobody says that about Black History Month, or that LGBT Pride Month is about demonizing straights. This is part of, as you said, the anti-white narrative.
No, precisely. And it's so egregious. It's so wanton. It is so in your face at this point. They have increasingly are not bothering to give these wonderful and pleasant sounding pretexts, which we refer to as the miss of pretext, moralization, intellectualization, sentimentalization of pretext to arrive at anti-white conclusions. For so many decades, they've been giving those, and white people have been beguiled by them. We've lowered our defenses, and we've allowed our destiny to be taken from us, our inheritance to be taken from us, and we have been allowing ourselves to be erased from the civilizations that our people have created. And know this, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to places that we've lost, like Rhodesia and Australia, these places we've lost, the anti-whites will write into the textbooks in years to come that there really weren't white people there in the first place. There might have been a little bit, and they were quite evil, but nothing was taken from them. Don't be silly. So that's the same kind of cynicism that you have to bring to your dealings with anti-whites in all ways, because they are criminal in all ways. They are liars in all ways, even when they put on the $2,000 Armani suit, or they're out in the streets as a miscreant with carte blanche to gut you, to set the car on fire. And we had, of course, Tim, you probably heard, they were going through suburbia, a wild anti-white mob going through suburbia in one of our cities, outside one of our cities and claiming with a megaphone that the white people needed to turn their homes over to them and they needed to
Was this in
open their
Portland
wallets
as well?
Yes, yes.
Because that city needs to be named and shamed more.
Yes. Well, and this is what happens when it actually perfect to bring up right now, the fact that we have we've reached this nodal tipping point, is what we referred to it the past couple of weeks, where positions of authority, elected positions, appointed positions, judges, police chiefs, etc., too many of these positions have fallen into the hands of anti-whites, and as a consequence, there are too few places to go for to redress the gross injustices that are taking place. In the past, we used to be able to have our parents, their parents, their parents, no matter how bad an anti-white might behave, there was always going to be probably a white person, but maybe in some cases a non-white person, and some other bureaucracy, some other department, somewhere up the food chain who would say, well, this was very unjust what happened, and so we're going to reverse what this anti-white did, and we would, as a consequence, be able to maintain civilization. Well, there's no real way to measure that until now, until we've gotten to see this actually in effect, where you have no recourse. Too many of the positions of power, too many of the nodes of power are now held by anti-whites. Too few of them are held by people who might be reasonable. And as a consequence, you have people marching through the streets and they're permitted. Police are ordered to stand down, and there's nobody who can gainsay that. You have prosecuting attorneys like in St. Louis, where they moved against this McCloskey couple because 300 to 500 anti-whites decided to rip the wrought iron gate off of their fence and march across their property, and they walked outside with their firearms, and the prosecuting attorney moves against them. Totally unjust, totally against the law. You have a prosecuting attorney, anti-white woman up in New York, who is moving to dissolve the National Rifle Association. Totally unjust, totally illegal, and there's just simply no other departments, no other people up the food chain, no other nodes of power that you can turn to get justice. We're entering Banana Republic stage as a consequence. You now have these anti-whites in positions of power with very low IQs, very ruthless as well, and they have no desire to hide their animus. They have no intelligence with which to hide their animus, and so they're just using their political positions to carry out their political attacks. Yes, that's totally illegal. Yes, it's utterly unethical, but there's no one to stop them.
That's occurred because of two reasons. The deliberate Marxist infiltration of the institutions, which has been happening over the past 50 years, that a lot of people are now only just becoming awoken to. This includes not just the universities, the schools, the media, but also the corporations with their corporate social responsibility policies, and now even science and medicine now. But there's also the enablers, those who aren't explicitly anti-white or anti-West, but they give concessions to them, such as, yeah, we'll rename this brand or this city. Yes, we'll take down this statue. Yes, we do agree that the OK sign is a white supremacist slogan. And this, obviously, it continues their march, the Marxist march, but has consequences for free speech, artistic freedom, and community cohesion.
Well, precisely. And for so long, I've been in the white positive sphere for over 2 decades. And we've been trying to tell people, and the ones the heroes before me, and I learned from them, a great deal from them. And we've been trying to tell the white population in this country, and by extension, as best as we could, the rest of the world, that you're not going to be able to appease the anti-whites forever. This appeasement, this eternal, just give a little bit more, surrender a little bit more. never ends. And as a consequence, they have now reached this point where they can say, no, it's not going to be good enough that you hate yourself. It's not going to be good enough that you feel shame for being white. It's not going to be good enough that you give us preferential treatment and special privileges in hiring, in education, in promotions, in government contracts, in loans, in business assistance, in tax breaks. It's not going to be good enough that we get all the special treatment. It's not going to be good enough that you discriminate against your own people, even though it's illegally, to do all of these things for us. Now we want to outright be able to discriminate against you openly, without having to do it in a creative way anymore. We want you to take open blame, and we want you to openly flail yourself, punish yourself. These are the kinds of things that we see classes are, and of course they've been in effect for a great many years now, but they're taking an uptick. 2020, and they're going to be continuing to get worse, which is good as long as we can get to our brothers and sisters out there who walk away from these class events, these anti-white classroom events that work at university, et cetera, high school, elementary school. As long as we can be there and say, there's another way. You can turn away from anti-whiteism. You can go free.
We saw the future of this anti-white, anti-Western, cultural Marxist utopia that they're trying to implement through Chaz Chop in that 6 blocks of Seattle. It basically descended into a race war. It lasted less than a month. That basically showed that if these people were in charge of the whole of society, this is what would happen. And I refer to Antifa as basically the white arm of the Black Lives Matter movement, because they are an overwhelmingly white organization, but they don't realize that they're useful idiots. You really think you're going to be spared? And we saw that during the George Floyd triggered riots and looting. Even if you proclaim to be on their side, or or if you put a sign up saying you're a black-owned businesses, didn't matter. You still got looted and vandalized.
Mm-hmm. Well, precisely, and that, again, demonstrating what the real objectives are when it comes to the anti-whites. They will use any excuse to carry out the victimization that they desire to inflict on Westernkind and Western civilization. And the sooner we recognize this, accept this, and then take steps to prevent this from happening, which of course means that we have to get to and empower our brothers and sisters. Until that happens, the anti-whites will continue to be able to run amok. They will continue to be able to inflict this harm to whiter races from our own civilization. And when it comes to things like the excuses that they give, this is how we should handle it, because the reality is that people want to talk about this George Floyd. It could have been Floyd George. In a society, Western civilization that is multiracial, as we have across the globe, regrettably, where we have people who have numerical courage, communities who have numerical courage, and they are acting out, and they have carte blanche from the government. When you have a situation like this, you're going to have scenarios every single day where someone with power is going to harm someone without power. And where you have populations that are majority white, you're going to occasionally have people with power who are white harming someone who doesn't have power, who is non-white. Any single one of those scenarios is one that the anti-whites can say, this is the proof that the anti-white narrative is true. And on this grounds, because of this act, we now can exact grievous revenge. Look at how many police officers have been murdered and maimed. And that is only a fraction of the total white population that have been murdered, raped, and maimed, etc., in the name of this particular event. And it's continuing to this day. You're pointing out and making a perfect example when we look over to this CHOP environment. What happened there was the anti-whites in power allowed this to happen. They allowed anti-whites to take control of so many city blocks, and it only ended because the what was it, the mayor, I guess, the anti-whites ended up marching over to the mayor's house because one of the other anti-whites on the city council got into a disagreement with the mayor. They marched over to the mayor's house, and of course, there were other things happening in this anti-white zone where they were murdering, they were raping, but they marched over there. The mayor didn't like that and decided, well, this will have to come to a swift end. But that is Banana Republic, and we had people there demanding and getting from whites money right out of their pocket because they were white and they are the bad guy in the anti-white narrative, and the people receiving the money were non-white. It's important to point out that the only group on planet Earth, the only group of people on planet Earth that does not prefer their group are white anti-whites. And we got that from Lovely Porridge, shared a video with me where they shared this study. The only group that doesn't prefer their own kind are white anti-whites. That demonstrates a real sickness. It demonstrates that you end up not preferring your group, hating your group, when you hate yourself, because you have been taught to do so by the anti-white narrative.
You say it's not enough to be red-pilled on race. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not enough to just not know, or to just know the differences between the races, because that is not going to galvanize you. It's not going to make any of the other ideas that could possibly be attendant or associated actionable. You need to have a psychological defense for the psychological warfare that is waged against us. Part of the biggest problem is when we talk about the differences between race, and I've just, for now the past 2 decades, I've been taking my head in my hands, is that we talk about all of these first of all, the minor things like maturation rate or what have you. These things are important in a specific focused way or a specific focused conversation. But too often they end up with this conversation about IQ. And but this is where the difference is. Well, when you resolve that IQ is the difference, then you enter an area of conversation, an area of debate where anti-whites can then say, the reason why this group is, or that group has a lower IQ is because of environment. And of course, then you're now into a conversation of nature versus nurture instead of moving forward with white well-being. The question that's never asked, which is the question that really matters, and I'll just put the IQ issue to bed for all time, I hope, for the listeners, is that if the average IQ, which is what is claimed for Westernkind, is 100, and the average IQ, which is claimed for East Asians, is 104 or whatever it is, when you have a white person whose IQ is 104, they don't become Asian. They don't start acting like an Asian person. They don't start building Asian civilization. Similarly, if the average IQ of an American black, if it is, as claimed, 85, when you have a white person with an IQ of 85, you don't suddenly have a individual who has become black, who suddenly could build black civilization. In fact, the difference is instinct. We refer to it a little bit more loftily with the verbiage of biospirit, because we believe that there's something beyond just the biology that our instruments can't yet measure. But it really is instinct, and we see the different instincts exhibited in different types of dog breeds, horse breeds, different types of tigers, wild dogs. Many different types of animals of a single species have different breeds or races, and they have very different instincts. Instinct projected on your environment in its aggregate is culture. This is why everywhere white people go, they make Western culture. Everywhere Asian people go, they make Asian culture. Black people, they make black culture. The only time you don't see it happening is when you have a particular body of people who are numerically diffident in the body of another people. So they're frightened of projecting their biospirit onto your environment. They're afraid, just like if there were, say, 1,000 of us in the middle of China, we would do everything we could to just imitate the Chinese. But if there were 10 million of us in the middle of China, even though China might have 1 billion people, we would begin projecting Western civilization into our ghettos, if you would. But that is really what is far more important than just understanding that there are races that are different, and as a consequence, X, whatever that might be. We need to know, and we need to understand a lot more, and we need to empower ourselves so we can empower those around us.
I'm still confused what you started off talking about the IQ, and then you jumped to the how race is related to culture and civilization. Did I miss one of the links you were trying to make there?
Sure. The IQ issue, of course, this is something that in and of itself can be contentious. And
Yes.
what exactly is IQ? You know, and
because I've
too
heard
often
I've heard this the IQ the race and IQ. I wouldn't say argument, but this perspective many times before. But I've always considered it quite it's not relevant to the situation that we're in at the moment.
Well, regrettably, it's one of those things that can now be measured and been measured for a great many years, and they have been IQ tests have been standardized and performed around planet Earth, and they show now very predictable results. The anti-whites have tried to claim that there are a lot of other factors going on, but even with all of the highest IQ white people that they can find and all of the American taxpayer dollars that they can thieve from us to the tune now of billions, they haven't been able to elevate IQ artificially. So because there is this measurable phenomenon of the human mind, which generally comports, not all the time, with achievement in life, it then becomes this crutch. And you want to say that people end up saying, well, because of these IQ differences, we are able to build X, Y, or Z. But when you are on, so civilization, rockets, trains, automobiles, and lower IQ, you can't build these things. But what you end up doing then is putting yourself into a conversation where an anti-white can endlessly harangue and enmesh you, entangle you, and all of these different arguments about the reason why IQ is what it is, and then steps should be taken to ameliorate the outcome or effects of IQ. That just ends up hobbling the effort to advance white well-being. Now, there is something, and this was the linkage, the nexus. There is something that is different among the races that has been given very little attention. We give it a lot of attention, and that is instinct, behavioral instinct. So my contention is that the average white IQ could be 90, and we would still build Western civilization. It wouldn't be as advanced as it is today. It might take a lot longer to reach this level of scientific expertise, but it would nonetheless be an expression of what is inside of us, and that is projected onto our environment. We see, just like we see in these measurements of IQ or height or maturation rate and disease patterns and aging patterns and all of these differences among the races of man, we also see, and it's consistent throughout time and around the world, this instinct expressed on the environment. Asiatic peoples produce Asian civilization. They always have. When they come to Western civilization, if there are too few of them in a given area, we refer to that as numerically diffident, and they are then too frightened to project their biospirit onto our environment. They feel the pressure of a much larger body of people on them. They don't know what the consequences would be if they started trying to change the names of our streets. At some point, a body of people living in another body of people reaches what we refer to as a point of numerical courage. Now, this is influenced by a lot of things, not just the numbers, but we reduce it to that phrase to understand it. So you could have a body of people who would reach a level of numerical courage earlier than another body of people at the exact same number, because the first body of people might be emboldened by a religion that empowers them. And we see this in parts of Europe where you can have a particular population practicing a particular religion from another part of the world, who can have roughly the same number of people in a given white country as, say, over in the United States, another non-white group of people. And yet we see that the body of people who is emboldened by a particular religion, they're able to take their fight, if you will, to the community around them. They begin building their religious temples and et cetera. And then what ends up happening is, where you have more than one biospirit present, more than one group or race of people present, you end up in a cultural arms race, a Cold War, if you will, where you begin to see a little bit of both cultures, both biospirits, and one erasing the other. That has always, throughout all of human history, ended up in balkanization and bloodshed. Wherever we have tried to push people together, and the West did so, most people don't know that we created almost all of these non-white countries around the world. We drew the lines on a map, and we thought, well, these people will work together, those people will, and when they ended up being biospiritually a little different, and sometimes it might have been just as a consequence of being separated by a mountain or something, they are quite hostile to each other, and it ended up in bloodshed. That is the same future for us if we can't recapture our destiny and get a handle on who and what we are and the real understanding of the human animal.
Okay, I get what you're trying to say about IQ now, in that the anti-whites, they claim that IQ differences are the result of a disadvantage caused, and their implied anti-white racism, which I would refer to that as, when I talk about disadvantage of racial or ethnic groups, I refer to that as welfare, which is, and this is where my libertarian streak comes in, is that these the best way for people to overcome disadvantage is to help themselves, but obviously you have governments who, and a lot of them have the white man's burden, or the white savior complex, and think that by giving all this welfare to these other cultural, ethnic, religious groups, that's going to fix it, which it just perpetuates the racial division and the disadvantage as well. But going on to your other point, it was a Kreshko Kirsmik who, when you talked about groups building religious monuments in other countries, it reminded all of us, I think, of all the mosques that are popping up in the West, and that was certainly the greatest concern of a lot of people in the first decade of the 20th century, after 9/11, the Islamization of the West. But I just want to go to what you spoke about, whether there was, what would happen if there was 100,000 white people in China would begin to become more anglicized. And it's made me think of, I'm not sure if you've know any such people, but there are many white people in the West who have a fascination, love of all things Japanese culture, from anime to kimonos and that, which is fine. They get a lot of enjoyment out of that. They go to Japan, they might marry a Japanese person, but they still have that awareness that they're not Japanese. They admire the culture from a distance, but I also wouldn't say that they're anti-white. They just enjoy the Japanese culture, but it doesn't necessarily come from hatred of their own culture or race.
Well, see, it depends on an individual. We would say that such a person is white flighting into this adoration or fixation with a non-white culture, and we say that because there isn't a laboratory in the universe where we could examine an individual case of this and be able to say that this person definitely just likes this non-white culture, and that's why they are so interested in it, because every white person is exposed for the totality of their life to anti-whitism, and as a consequence, they're like fish in the ocean. They're not aware that there is an ocean. That is their world, and they learn that they are evil for being white. They learn that there's nothing to be proud of in white history, or very little. That in fact there's far more to be ashamed of, and that indeed you're carrying inside of you this evil seed. And we see the people as a consequence, and they do it all the time. They on bigger or smaller scales. Somebody who is far more intellectually adept is going to be able to say, take to the high literature of Japan, or culture of Japan. And by the way, though, they of course they ignore the atrocities committed by Japanese on the Americans, on Australians, on the Chinese, the pillaging and the of Chinese towns, and raping of every single woman in the town. They ignore all of that when they glamorize it. It's one of these things that the farther it is away, the easier it is to romanticize it.
I would say that because obviously Australia was in Japan's sights during World War II, so those stories of Japanese atrocities and war crimes, they envisaged in what we call the Anzac history. We just had victory in the Pacific Day last Saturday, and I know that this is going to expose a double standard here. The white person, whether they're an Australian or an American, they say, well, the Japanese people of today, they had nothing to do with imperial Japan. Look at how well Japan has prospered and been peaceful since the end of World War II, provided us with some of the most iconic entertainment products and technology, and you see what I was getting at there, that with the anti-whiteism, that concession wouldn't be made of a white. Or you just look at Germany, for example. Their youth are taught about how wicked their nation was during Nazi Germany. And you could say that that's contributed to why they allowed all those millions of migrants in.
Precisely. Absolutely. And of course, the double standard there is in place because of the genuine objectives, the unspoken genuine objectives of the anti-whites. But I was going to say it could be white flighting in a very intellectual way into another culture, or we in the United States, we see it all over the place. These people white people taking up these what are very alien, very different cultural, in some cases, almost like the boutique elements of certain non-white cultures, and they will adopt them, and they look so incongruous, like I can't even, what could we say? Maybe like an alligator in the tundra, or an alligator in the snow somewhere up north. They are completely out of place. These people feel out of place. They look out of place, and they never achieve the health that they are seeking, or the stability that they're seeking. And here's the reason why. Here's the reason why also that we don't have any multi-racial scenario that has ever lasted in the history of the world. The reason for it is that when we project our biospirit onto our environments and we then see it and receive it, we harmonize with it. It's what we see inside of ourselves when we create what's inside of ourselves in the world. That is a harmony that we feel very easy to identify when you go to, say you're an Australian, you go to Germany, and you look at the architecture of, maybe not the modern architecture, which is very often now made by a lot of foreigners or non-white people. But when you look at the architecture that we created anywhere in the world, you'll harmonize with it. You look at a religious temple that white people have built, and you will harmonize with it in some weird way, even though you might not practice the religion. Similarly, when you are in an all non-white environment, where I'm sure they're all superior to ours, but when you are in a non-white environment and you have their cultural hues expressed by way of their biospirit, you feel a dissonance, you feel a disharmony, you're not quite comfortable. When the anti-whites, the one place that they definitely tell the truth is, and now that's not to say that you might not appreciate, you can still look at and appreciate the high art or architecture of a non-white race, but you still feel this feeling of being out of place. And so the only place the anti-whites really tell the truth is when they say the non-white people don't feel comfortable in your civilization. They don't, because it's not their biospiritual expression. They always say they have to make it theirs. And the reason why they say they have to make it theirs or they're not going to feel right is because of what I just said. You cannot have multiracial societies because multiracial societies are born out of different biospirits, and different biospirits cause dissonance, and you have biospiritual incompatibility. And if you want to correct that, if you want to somehow make that outcome different, you're going to need a different species. This is just the human animal. It is the way it is. It cannot be undone. And if anything, we need to embrace and understand what we are, what all the different races of man are, and we'll be a lot happier for it.
I just want to pick up on what you said about the Western architecture. You claim that white people they feel more at home than, say, when they're seeing non-white architecture. I don't think I completely agree with that. Well, Australia, because of our, and it's always been referred to the tyranny of distance. We are surrounded by Southeast Asia, and so popular holiday spots are Bali in Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, Vietnam, and so Australians, through just regular holiday and tourism, I would disagree that they feel somewhat foreign in those. Well, obviously they are in a foreign country, but I would disagree that the architecture makes them feel less comfortable than if they were seeing European architecture.
Well, here's what I would say there is to not confuse familiarity with harmony. So if you go to a place plenty of times, I mean, I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and there are plenty of places of Washington, D.C. that are very non-white. And having been numerous times in these places, they're familiar. I recognize them. I know what's around each corner. I know what's around each corner, roughly what it's going to look like, even if I've never been around that corner before. That's familiarity. What I'm talking about here is harmony versus dissonance. And if I would challenge anyone really for themselves to look to foreign literature, art, architecture, morals, mores, and then look to the same across Western civilization, even in countries where they speak a different language than your native tongue, and see if you don't experience a harmony, a harmonizing with the aforementioned when it is Western from white people, and a dissonance with the non-white creations of the same kind. And I would say that at the same time, that we are functioning as savagely abused people. We don't know how great we can be. We don't know our true identity, our true spirit anymore, and we haven't for a long time. Going free is all about trying to align again with the archetype of Westernkind. When you grow up learning the kinds of things and being subjected to the child abuse that we are subjected to, when you're a little child, when you're a little white boy, little girl, and you learn that this non-white group over here is special, you're able to put two and two together, even if it's only subconsciously, that if they're special, then you must not be. There must be something wrong. And when you are infected with such deleterious ideas over the course of your life, you end up being blinded to what your potentials are. You end up being blinded to what is truly in tune and in keeping with who and what we are as a people. And as a consequence, we see, for example, a great example of this is these anti-white but white artists who embrace the antithesis of all things white and Western. We all know that when if you're a healthy white person and you look at some of the most magnificent creations of art in Western civilization, even if you are somebody who is deep into just popular culture, when you see something or hear something by Vivaldi, or you see one of the works of high art in the West, they can recognize that this is something truly special. Now, and for decades now, you'll find white artists who produce things like Piss Christ, just absolutely vulgar, disgusting inversions of our biospirit. These are great examples of children in adult bodies who have been horribly abused throughout their childhood. And we liken this to a scenario that we can imagine where if you had an eagle and you fettered its wings so that it could never learn to fly, then as an adult it would trudge through the dust of the earth with the other flightless birds. Elephants is notorious for you peg them with a heavy chain in the ground, and then once they can't get away, and then once they're adults, you can use twine and a little stick, and they won't try to get away because they've been convinced that they are incapable. The same is true for us.
We've got a super chat on entropy from Never Rest, who's a local down here. He sent through $3 Australian. He's asked you, what is the root cause of the anti-white agenda? Why do they hate us so much? Love your work, guys.
That's a fantastic question, and it's one of the most important things that a white person needs to understand, because the root cause, whether it's white or non-white, is jealousy and envy. They look at us. Now, for white people, I can start first and just say, for whatever reason, they don't feel connected to the white race. They don't feel that they are inheritors of the intelligence or the beauty or that are, of course, are not expressed in toto in any individual, but in the body of the people as a whole. In our creations, we have this great dignity that is handed down to each of us as members of Westernkind from our past, really a glorious history, and we can fairly say is we happily put it up against the histories of any other peoples around the world. But they look out at the world, whether white or non-white, the Western world, and they see people that are beautiful, better looking than they are, healthier than they are, smarter than they are, longer lived than they are, more creative than they are, and many other things. And instead of acknowledging that there are going to be people better than yourself in the world, people who are born with better talents or better connections or what have you, and then endeavoring to try to match them or surpass them, which is the healthy response to jealousy and envy, they instead identify themselves, they name themselves victims. They were unlucky, and they will often try to name a god or a fate or what have you. But you cannot take revenge, which of course is what a victim gains the right to do. You cannot take revenge openly in the name of a god today or in the name of fate today. And so, of course, you need excuses. And that is where anti-whitism comes in. So that is the chicken egg scenario. And then once you have that moving, you have individuals who come into the world and they can begin with the jealousy and envy, or they can first receive the anti-white narrative, the anti-white meme pathogens, and then find reasons to be jealous or envious of the white race. Of course, the victimization of whites takes its form against the avatar of the white race, which is any white person that's close by, suddenly represents the wealthiest, the smartest, the fittest, etc., the recipient of the greatest dignity from our past. This is what they want to victimize us for, and then they create a host of pretexts to justify that victimization, and just equally as important, to get us to lower our defenses so that they can victimize us. So therefore they need these the excuses, as we referred to earlier, the myths of pretexts, and it's been working for them. That is why the phrase "no white guilt" is so upsetting to them. I've used it for a great many years now, and that's why I ended up making it the channel's name, the project's name, because if you don't have white guilt, then you won't lower your defenses, and if you won't lower your defenses, then they cannot victimize you as easily as they would have. They hate you immediately when you declare that you have no white guilt.
Let's now turn to the US presidential election, which is on November 3rd. The Democratic National Convention is happening now in Milwaukee, but it's basically a virtual convention because of the coronavirus pandemic, with everybody zooming in their roll call votes. Joe Biden was formally endorsed or accepted the nomination of the Democratic Party for president. He is a 78-year-old white male, and it was ironic, despite all of the intersectionality, identity politics that the Democrat Party had been promoting, that their final three candidates were all old white people in Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. All the non-whites dropped out mostly before the primary season eventually kicked off, and that's why Biden promised to pick a vice presidential nominee who was a woman, and then there was the push for it to be a woman of color. And so
Yes.
he picked
Please go ahead.
Kamala Harris, who, and the thing about obviously Biden being so old is that whoever he picks as vice president is very likely to be the president very soon. The expression is a heartbeat away from the presidency, but Kamala Harris potentially could be a brain cell away from the presidency. She is, as a politician, a horrible candidate, and she was also horrible in a former life as a prosecutor as well. But I just want you to comment first on the fact that Joe Biden won the party of diversity and the subsequent VP pick.
Yeah, it's really amusing. Actually, we predicted over on PWR when the anti-whites over the Democrat Party, I believe that they we can't know the insides. We can't know the inner workings. All we can do is see from the outside. Even the information that reaches us is probably massaged. I doubt anything is coming through that hasn't been massaged in some way, that hasn't been manipulated in some way, for whatever interests have released it. But ultimately, you had this case where Biden was healthier than he was or is today, and you had an investigation that was beginning in looking into the dealings in Ukraine with his son, with himself. And the Democrats ended up taking the position that the Donald Trump campaign, the Donald Trump presidency and soon to be campaign, were interfering with a potential oppositional candidate in Joe Biden. And as a consequence, they sewed themselves into the corner to having to use this guy because they couldn't justify losing to him, which they knew in all likelihood they would in this upcoming 2020 election. They could not justify losing to him with anyone else. With Joe Biden, if he lost, then they would be able to say, well, Trump stole the election. He undermined our candidate. As Biden continued to enter his dotage, and where he's, his acuity now is really questionable, maybe even sanity soon. As he had entered this and continues, you had the cost fallacy, sunk cost fallacy, where they thought, well, we've spent so much on him, we need him to be the candidate now, so that we can then have a slow-moving coup against Trump by claiming that Trump undermined his candidacy, Biden's candidacy, by way of this investigation. We needed him. Yes, he's getting a little ill, but we've already put so much in. And then each successive week, as he's gotten worse, at any point, if they hadn't invested so much and if they didn't need him to be able to move forward with the slow-moving coup over the next 4 years, saying that Trump stole the election by way of the undermining the candidacy of Biden, they would have changed. They would have gone to somebody else. I feel at this point, I feel like they would have, if they could call it and just say, the power holders behind the Democrat Party, if they could just say, we give up. Let's just get to the next 4 years so that we can tie your hands, Trump. I think they would. But the important thing, I think, for your listeners to appreciate is that way back when they first started talking about the Ukraine scandal and what happened with Biden's son, we said on PWR, I said specifically the video is still there of me saying it 100% now has to be Biden. They have to go with him. They can't go anywhere else because this is how they're going to undermine Trump's presidency. And this was long before and then all during all of the discussion of who's it going to be, who's going to be their candidate. I just stuck with it. Well, it's got to be Biden, and sure enough, it has to be Biden. But it's hilarious now that we have this Kamala, who is now the VP. What's good that you just pointed out, Tim, and thank you for mentioning it. It's sagacious that the average person believes that the office holder is really the power holder. They don't really quite comprehend how much power is wielded by people who we don't know who they are behind the offices. So when they look out at the world, when your average libertarian or your average independent or even your average Democrat voter, when they look out at these candidates, they see one who is not going to be able to carry on a conversation with Iran or North Korea or Russia or any of these others without falling over himself, forgetting where he is or maybe even what his name is, maybe trying to smell people. And that then, yes, indeed, the next person in line to be president is this rabid anti-white who has a long record of behaving despicably in every office she has held, no successes anywhere she has gone. So the Democrats are in full train wreck mode at this point.
We are ending towards the end of the stream, so if you have any questions or super chats, now's the time to put them forth. It's quite amazing, despite all the identity politics that is developed throughout the Western world, that the United States voters have never elected a female president or vice president, despite there being 3 on previous tickets. And obviously they celebrated the milestone of the first black president, even though Obama himself was half white. He had a white mother, but so he wasn't actually a traditional African American, and neither is Kamala Harris. Her father is Jamaican and mother Indian. So actually doesn't have those African American roots to the United States, the same that Obama didn't.
Yeah, precisely. It is quite a interesting subject. I think that when it comes to, certainly when it comes to a potential female president in the United States or vice president, I think what ends up undermining a lot of these candidates uh, are, quite frankly, the track records of female leaders in powerful positions across the United States. And too many people have seen too many Nancy Pelosi's out there. You know, they've seen too many of these wild-eyed, crazy harridans who shriek from one emotional outburst to the next. And as a consequence, I think that, which is not to say that there aren't women out there that can that successfully hold office. I mean, I think the governor in South Dakota, I think she's probably doing a fine job.
Excellent.
Yeah. But I think too many people they look to that highest office, and they're just they get worried about putting a woman into that role. Certainly now, when you're going to have it's not going to be a Margaret Thatcher. It's going to be some rabid anti-white, non-white woman, and and she's going to be claiming heritage, black heritage, even though she's, I mean, looking at her, she obviously, the father, I understand, doesn't identify, or the father's family, as black, but of course they wouldn't, because they have some white and maybe some Indian in them, of the Americas. And in a place like Jamaica, somebody with that makeup would not identify as black. But she has enough. She has more black than Elizabeth Warren has Indian. So I guess it makes it legitimate for her to claim that. But yeah, they want to try to claim she's a first black woman and first Indian from India that would hold this office, as though that is a qualification. And for anti-whites, it actually is. But what's beautiful, Tim, I've got to tell you, especially as we get here to the end, is that she was the most ruthless toward Joe Biden when she was running for the nomination. She's absolutely sided with the woman or women who said that he sexually assaulted them. She essentially called him like a Ku Klux Klan leader. Absolute, and now has flipped just 180 degrees, demonstrating that she has no character whatsoever. She is classless as can be. She couldn't be trusted as far as you could throw her. And you wouldn't throw her, but if you did, it would be into something very soft that she would enjoy and be asked to be thrown into.
How can the defund the police supporters vote for her when she is the police? That's been her entire career.
Yes, precisely. And of course, you have these things where she tries to claim that, well, she was hard on pedophiles, but then when pedophile cases came forward, she undermined all of the investigations into those. All of these things are going to come back to haunt her. All of these things are going to come back to haunt that Joe Biden has been behind. They're going to come back to haunt him. So I see this being, that's why you see the anti-whites trying to do this thing with the mail-in voting, because they know that is an absolute wreck, that they'll be able to hold up the results of the election, that they'll be able to demand that Trump step down, that they will try to push Pelosi up into the White House in the interim. They're going to do everything they can to effectuate a slow-rolling coup and keep Trump from exercising the power that he has rightly earned by way of the electorate.
I mentioned this on last week's Unshackled, but I'd like to get your reaction to it. If, hypothetically, Kamala Harris does become the first female president, or should be the first female president of color, does that mean that the milestone still needs to be reached to have a white female president?
I think that it's when Trump ran for office, or just prior to him running for office after Obama, I speculated that there would never be, and I believe that there is video of this as well, where I was giving a speech, that there will never be another white man as the president of the United States unless it was something like we had never seen before. Somebody who was outside of the system and came into the system with tons of money of his own, or backers, numerous backers with ungodly sums of money, and he could somehow overcome the entire system. Well, that ended up happening with Donald Trump. I think it's safe to say that as anti-whiteism marches forward, the likelihood that there will ever be another white male president is nearly zero, and the likelihood that there would be a white female, either president or vice president, is a little higher than zero, but very low. We're moving into a very different kind of voting electorate in the United States.
Or maybe not another male straight president, because I think Pete
right.
Buttigieg, who was the front runner for the while with the Democrats, he might get another turn in he's only in his late 30s in 4 or 8 years or whenever.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. It's possible. But when this breaks down, when the anti-whites really begin to break it down, the different victim groups and who gets what and we see that at these universities where it's as anti-white as it can get, where it's at some of these companies where it's as anti-white as it can get, even the white homosexuals, even the white females as well, they're being asked to leave. They're saying that when they want to have their meetings, they want to have their spaces for themselves, they're saying, even though you're a victim group and you're an ally and you got to be a good ally for us, you still can't know the experience of a non-white person. You still can't walk in our shoes. So I don't know, as the electorate changes rapidly, there may be an opportunity for something like for a homosexual, perhaps man or woman, or maybe even someone who is transitioning or something, giving it a go. But ultimately, I think it's the Banana Republic, I guess, outcome unraveling is really what we're going to see with the coming years after Trump's second term.
Rural Nation Media has got a question, which is, I'm sure you've got an opinion on, if Biden does win, what do you think should be our, implying white positive, white well-being movement next move?
Well, what we need to do is, and Rural Nation, great question, and thank you for your service to white well-being. What we need to be doing with as rapidly as we can in the United States, the most important thing right now is that we get Trump another 4 years. So where we can help, we help to get Trump another 4 years. And the reason why is because of what Trump will not do to us, not because of what he will do for us. He's not going to do anything for us. He's not white positive, but he's not going to do the Biden plan. He's not going to sign that treaty that would make it illegal, depending upon how you interpret it, and the anti-whites, how they would interpret it, make it illegal to discriminate in personal matters, which of course could be dating, sex partners, who you marry. Biden would sign that. So what we need to do is we need another 4 years from Trump so that we can remain status quo and we can push going free, the psychological defense for the psychological warfare that is waged against us around the world. If we empower our people with a crisp, clear understanding of what is actually leveled against us with anti-whites and anti-whitism, and we begin as we are. I just sent out books to 7 different countries. This was yesterday, around the world, Serbia, one of them. I mean, the information is going everywhere. If we begin speaking, as we are slowly beginning to do so, with a single voice, a single tongue, even though we might have different languages, speaking with the lexicon and dialectics of going free, even the most powerful in the world will quiver at that. they'll wonder what's happening. And it'll be because we have the antivenom for what they have poisoned us with. We have the cure for what they continue to infect us with. They are moving as quickly as they can. And we predicted that this would be a year and a decade of two storms, one of darkness, one of light. We have to hold up our side of their progress by doing all that we can to progress and spread going free. And I am doing things, by the way, when you are, ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, when you are doing your little part in the world, whatever it might be, you're putting up, passing out a leaflet to just a friend you know, somebody you know, and saying, hey, you should check this out. This empowering yourself, reading Going Free, treating your mean pathogens. Know that you are a molecule of H2O that is joined with many others so that we have a tidal wave. And we are doing things behind the scenes right now and getting, making things happen that in years to come, you won't have to be as brave as you are today. So make sure that you get involved today so that you can say that you were there when you actually had to be brave to serve white well-being, because in the future, you won't have to be.
Anita McGuire has got a question. The Australian Constitution is based on the White Australia policy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that policy that was in effect when Australia federated until it was repealed in 1967. This has been ignored, but now we are demographically replaced and unable to discuss this. Are we under genocide?
Yeah, well, we would refer to that as white erasure is what's happening. And you could specifically say, if you want to specifically speak to genocide, you could say biological white erasure, and there are reasons for that. But yes, I am aware of it. And in fact, in the United States, our founding fathers made very clear that they were talking about the white race. In fact, they said the white race. The first policy for immigration specifically said the white race. And in numerous documents from the founding fathers said so as well. And this was at a time when you took it for granted that what you did was going to be for your people and not for the people of the world. Of course, they would have said at somewhere in these documents, the founding of this country, the founding of Australia, that if they had intended the country to be given to the world and their descendants to be disinherited of their country, they would have written that somewhere. Now, this is a very important thing that your questioner is pointing out, and that is that documents do not enforce themselves. So it doesn't matter how clearly they're written, how beautifully they're written, how many philosophers they cite. All that matters is the people who have the power to interpret them, because the people who have the power to interpret them can make them say what they mean to say or the exact opposite.
Well, that brings us to the end of the stream for tonight. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming on. You were previously on my Uncockables colleague, James Fox Higgins' Rational Rise a couple of weeks back. So you've been doing the rounds of the Australian alt media. You have got quite a following here, and following in your colleague Mark's footsteps. He's also appeared on all of our shows, and I guess it's best to finish on where we started, this interconnectedness.
Oh, indeed. I cannot tell you enough, and your audience enough, how much I love every white positive Australian. You all are absolutely sterling folks. I cannot wait to get over to Australia and throw my arms around every single one of you and pass out leaflets, put up signs, and do everything we can to wake up our brothers and sisters in that magnificent country that is only able to be created by our people, that is only exists in the hearts of Westmen around the world. Australia goes wherever the men of the West go. And big thank you to you, Tim, and of course to everyone who supports the work that I'm doing, Going Free, in Australia, New Zealand. I know we have a growing audience there. In all of these other places, Serbia, Greenland, Iceland, where was the Switzerland? We just are sending out so many connections now that this truly is taking form as something that is global, and as a consequence, something that will this time for our people be unstoppable.
Well, with this draconian lockdown in Melbourne, and along with the rest of the coronavirus restrictions, because another side effect of the outbreak here in Melbourne is that all our state borders are shut. So not only can you not come here, but we can't go to any other state, and a lot of the people from other states can't go anywhere. But there is a lot more Australians who are waking up to the government overreach and the globalist totalitarian agenda, particularly here in Melbourne. A whole anti-lockdown, pro-freedom movement has risen here. So certainly Australians, they are finding their voice. They're not being the quiet Australians, as our Prime Minister once coined us as.
No, I'm glad to see that, and I hope that we get past this COVID-19 thing as quick as possible, so we can get back to having our meetings and our conferences. And as Tim, you were pointing out when at the beginning of the show, I guess before we got started, I had just left the UK when COVID-19 was shutting everything down. We had a marvelous time there. We are growing all around the world, ladies and gentlemen. Get proud, get excited, get enthusiastic. Now's the time to make changes in the world. And not only that, but now's the time that we have to make changes in the world.
I saw Mark Collett, he shared on his Telegram the recent Hope Not Hate report, the alarming rise of a patriotic alternative, which he was incredibly pleased with.
Yeah, that's a magnificent. I love it. The anti-whites. What's beautiful, so beautiful, is that when we speak. Well, I guess first of all, the fact that the numbers are growing because we are the right people for the right time. Each and every single one of you know this in your heart. You were meant to be in the place you are now. You were meant to hear this message. You were meant then to take these steps and to move forward into the world in service to white well-being. Mark is doing it fabulously. Laura is doing it. There are people doing it all around the world. And it's the more connected we are, the more we talk, the more we share our ideas and talents, the stronger we are as a consequence. We were never going back to the old nationalism of the past, the old patriotism of the past. We're going to celebrate our distinct hues. We're going to highlight them. And yet we, at the same time, are going to join hands so that the anti-whites have a united white race. Like we say here, one nation with many countries.
And people can find you by your No White Guilt channel on YouTube, BitChute, as we mentioned before. You're on Telegram and Gab, and Patriotic Weekly Review. It's broadcast on Mark Collett's YouTube channel, but then he deletes the stream and then uploads it to BitChute after.
Precisely. Yeah, we're there, and that is Eastern Standard Time, so adjust accordingly. 2 to 4 on Wednesdays. We also, my colleague and I, Mr. Jared George, we have the After Party, which is on a host of channels, I guess 9 different platforms. Of course, my YouTube channel, No White Guilt, Discipline with NWG, and a couple of other places. And we do the after party. That varies on days. It can be Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, and different times as well. Sometimes midday, sometimes a little bit later in the evening. Of course, we have Going Free on Sundays. Usually can be, or often is 8 hours long, and it starts at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can go to my website, nowhiteguilt.org, as well for all of those links. You can also go to theafterparty.tv, which is the site that I share with Mr. George, the afterparty.tv, where you can find all of the videos that we are making and posting, all collected there, so that you can find us, even if we end up getting censored from many of these other platforms across the internet.
And of course, I'll be back live tomorrow night for the Uncockables, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the show YouTube and D Live channel. We'll go into the still incredible developments that are happening throughout Australia with the coronavirus pandemic. We'll go into more about the state border closures tomorrow night. Also, this mandatory, not mandatory, potential coronavirus vaccine, the Northern Territory election, which is coming up this Saturday, and of course focus more on what's happening at the Democratic National Convention over in the US. It'll be myself, David Hiscock, and James Fox Higgins for that. So please tune in. I'll have a special WilmsFront episode this Saturday night for the Northern Territory election, starting at 8 p.m. on the WilmsFront YouTube and D Live. Thank you for everyone for participating in the live chat. Thank you, Never Rest, for the super chat on Entropy, and thank you for the lemons, Askell Grimson on D Live, and Wallaby for the lemon as well. Thank you again, Jason. Have a good night, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the Unshackled.net to view all our shows. And to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.